Good afternoon. Senator Gorst and I are here today to explain how we can all continue to work together to put Jersey back on its feet and return not just to where we were, but potentially to an even better and stronger position. Many islanders have recognised more clearly than ever before that their daily lives and the prosperity that we enjoy are inextricably linked to the health of our businesses and the jobs they provide. Not just large companies, but the hairdressers and nurseries, dentists, supermarkets, and the many other businesses that we all rely on every single day. The initial impact of COVID-19 was extreme and immediate, affecting nearly every workplace. This inevitability caused a significant slowdown in our economy, creating an estimated loss in the region of over £100 million per month. In addition, the Fiscal Policy Panel has forecast that the value of Jersey's economy will fall by over 6% this year. And this is in common with other developed economies globally, which are also expected to see significant declines. As a response, we have moved fast to put in place the biggest financial support package the island has ever mobilised, potentially worth than £300 million. In March, phase one of the co-funded payroll scheme supported almost 7,000 employees to the tune of £2 million. And to date, approximately 20 million has been paid under phase two of the scheme for April, supporting more than 15,000 jobs. I am therefore pleased to announce that we are extending the payroll support until at least the end of August, subject, of course, to the approval of the final signing off of the Treasury Minister. As of today, according to the latest statistics, there are no patients in the General Hospital with COVID-19, and there are 2 active cases on island. This is evidence that our contain, delay and shield strategy has so far, thankfully, proved the worst predictions wrong and enabled us to protect islanders' health, particularly those members of our society who are most vulnerable. At the same time, our safe exit strategy has moved slowly but steadily from level 4 to level 3, allowing many businesses to open with the appropriate safety guidelines. I'm also pleased to announce today that based on expert medical advice, we will move to level 2 from Friday, the 12th of June. This will mean that many more businesses will be able to open with the appropriate safety, professional body and sector-specific guidelines in place. These businesses include some of those in hair and beauty, health and fitness, healthcare, and other services that provide close personal contact. Restaurants, cafes, and other food establishments able to offer a physically distanced indoor seated food service. Libraries, community centres, youth centres, places of worship, museums and galleries, cinema, theatres, concert venues, arcades, bowling alleys, all can open, with, of course, strict physical distancing and best hygiene practices. Some other leisure businesses and venues that involve close contact may open where they are able to follow strict sector-specific guidelines and best hygiene practices. Hotels and self-catering and bed and breakfast, boarding houses, lodging houses, accommodation, caravan parks and campsites can also open from that date, primarily, of course, for the local market and subject to medical advice and strict sector-specific guidelines. And this has all been made possible by the ongoing support, actions and sacrifices of islanders. But in the face of this ongoing pandemic, we must remain alert, and the progress to phase 2 will depend upon the continued containment of the virus, which is why it is essential that we all continue to follow the guidance and act responsibly. A political oversight group, together with the Economic Council, has been established to lead the economic recovery programme. To help guide that process, the States Assembly has agreed to hold an in-committee debate tomorrow on economic recovery. Given the huge economic ramifications of the pandemic, it is important that all States members come together as your elected representatives to contribute their views at the early stage of recovery planning. And we must recognise that as an Assembly, that out of the difficulties and challenges we are dealing with now will come opportunity, and with it, an opportunity for us to act collegiately, collectively, but still democratically in the very best interests of future generations of islanders. The Political Oversight Group and Economic Council is clear that its work must also be informed by consultation with islanders and businesses and business groups and industry sectors, and of course the scrutiny process. The aim is to have extended economic stimulus proposals for ministers to consider by the end of June, and a framework for future economy proposals for future political determination by September. This is a watershed moment for our island, one where we can decide the future of our economy, our community, and our overall society, one where we can ensure that we create full living wage employment, one where we can look to the sustainability of our economy and how we can lead in a technological and environmental context. I'll now ask Senator Gorst to talk about the important efforts taking place to support the island's charitable sector through COVID-19 and the very important work he's doing with his Treasury Minister colleagues. And following that, we'll be happy to take questions from the media. Ian.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Minister. And there are two areas I wanted to touch on this afternoon. The first of which is the charitable sector. And every islander is well aware of the work of volunteers across the island throughout this time of crisis. And I, on behalf of the government, want to thank all of those volunteers and all those who've continued to work in the charitable sector, some of them putting themselves in harm's way in regard to the virus. It is much appreciated, and we are extremely grateful for all the work that you have done. Senator Farnham and I said on a previous media conference that we would be announcing funding going into the charitable sector. And I can today say that it is my intention to initially distribute £2 million from the fund which holds the dormant bank account monies in the coming weeks. And after this media conference, I will be signing the order which will give effect to that distribution. We appreciate that charities have been using their reserves, and we hope that this initial tranche of money will go some way into supporting them throughout the coming weeks. An independent organisation will be appointed by me to review and decide upon all grant applications, and that is a requirement of the relevant law. So it will be a depoliticised distribution of funds to those charities that need it. But to be clear, the funds are principally going to be directed to charities assisting with projects and activities aimed at supporting the local community in terms of health and, of course, more generally, to cope in this time of emergency and its immediate aftermath. We are committed to supporting our charitable sector to ensure that they can continue to provide the invaluable services that islanders rightly rely upon. They can provide those services with passion, with direct personal touch, in a way that governments could never hope to do. And we hope that this money and future monies will continue to allow those individuals at the heart of those organisations to continue to serve islanders in an individual way, but also with passion. I'm also aware that there is continued disquiet and perhaps some lack of understanding around the work that is being undertaken at the airport with our pilot testing regime. We understand entirely those islanders that continue to feel fearful. And this pilot regime will allow us to move through, as Senator Farnham has just announced today, the further levels of the safe exit framework in a careful and safe manner. The testing rightly will provide the information which the STAC and the Medical Officer for Health will then be able to use to advise ministers in the coming weeks and months about how, if, when those measures at the border, which are currently 14-day quarantine, can be eased and can be moved through. We are absolutely clear that any changes at the border must be delivered carefully and safely. But we are equally clear, as Senator Farnham has just said, that getting our borders open, rebuilding our economy, protecting islanders' livelihoods and jobs is critically important to us. And we must move through these levels together. Of course, as you would expect with the pilot, there are things that went well over the weekend and things that didn't, and improvements that will be made in the coming days. But that data will provide confidence not only to health officials, but to ministers, and we know in due course to all islanders as we move through this framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Senators. Now we have members of the media here to ask questions. From Bailiwick, we have Martha, from Channel 103, Alex, from the BBC, Charlotte, from the JEP, Ian, and from ITV, Gary. So first we'll go to Bailiwick Express and Martha MacDonald.
Good afternoon, Ministers, and thank you again for your time. You've announced this afternoon that you will be extending the payroll scheme until at least August. What's the rationale for not extending for the full next quarter, as has been done in the UK? And which businesses, as in previous phases of the scheme, will be excluded from applying? So will you be extending deferrals for Social Security and GST payments as well?
Well, firstly, there are no plans for any further exclusions from the scheme, where the Treasury Minister has agreed in principle, although she's expected to sign the decision later today, to extend it to the end of August with a review at the end of July or during July. I anticipate it will be extended past August, but it's important that we monitor the state of the economy as we move towards that date. I wouldn't want to commit ourselves to a scheme now that we have to change as we move further down the road. In relation to the other fiscal questions, I shall hand over to the Assistant Treasury Minister.
Let me just say I'm here today as the Minister for External Relations. I have stood in for the Treasury Minister on other events similar to this, but I'm sure islanders will be pleased to know that she is fully recovered from her fall and is eager to be launching her package of fiscal stimulus in coming days. Senator Farnham is right. We are still currently in the support stage for the economy. We will be moving into the recovery stage. There will, of course, be some overlap between that support stage, and that's why he's announced today the extension of the co-payroll scheme. Treasury Minister will be coming forward with her package of fiscal stimulus measures, and will move into recovery generally. And I think that those stimulus measures will come forward perhaps earlier than some are thinking, and there seems no good reason for us to make an announcement to extend the scheme until October. August is appropriate as you think about the safe exit framework and the way that we're moving through that. So we should be looking to introduce stimulus measures earlier than perhaps you might see elsewhere across the globe. Senator Farnham is right. The Treasury Minister is not excluding any of the included businesses now. In actual fact, the review that she is undertaking with the Social Security Minister might mean that there are some refinements, certainly around self-employed individuals who have both categories of contribution. We want to make that clear. We're also looking at the way that businesses calculate their profits, and whether that needs to be refined from just 1 month to a 3-monthly rolling basis. So we're going to see that scheme enhanced, not curtailed, and in the period between now and the end of August we'll be coming forward with those stimulus measures.
Can I just make clear, Martha, following your question, that the fact that we're not extending past the end of August at this stage is no indication that we're not going to do it. I want to reiterate again, there will be no cliff edge for businesses. We're not going to suddenly stop support. As Ian said, we'll move into the next phase, and there will be continued support for businesses and jobs, not just now, but into the recovery period and into the longer term future, especially for those sectors who have been worst hit.
Sorry, so just to come back to that last part of my question, I asked whether you'll be extending deferrals for Social Security and GST payments as well, and I'm not sure if I heard a response on that. Could I have a yes or no answer from the Assistant Treasury Minister?
Yes. So the support element of what we'll be proposing, as the Deputy Chief Minister has said, for those hardest hit sectors, he and his officials are working together with Treasury officials for a scheme that would probably run throughout the course of the winter, as you would expect. But if I tried to answer it, perhaps I wasn't directly enough. If we are bringing forward stimulus measures during the course of July and August, and as I've said before, the Ministry is considering tax reductions and other reductions of contributions, as well as a pot of money to stimulate the economy. If they are brought forward in that period of time, then it seems very unlikely that we will be deferring further the GST and the Social Security contributions. But bearing in mind, we're not asking businesses to pay what's currently being deferred for another 12 months.
Okay, thank you. Senator Farnham, the Income Forecasting Group report published last week indicates that there will be a downturn in revenue from the high-value residency scheme, both in terms of tax and property sales over £2 million. Meanwhile, Locate Guernsey is reporting an increase in interest for their respective scheme. Given the major hit this could have on stamp duty and possible investment going forwards, what is the government doing to rectify this?
I think it's important to note that our property market will remain strong, although we are expecting fluctuations. So we might see a fall in the market initially, but the predictions are that will quickly recover over the next 2 to 3 years. Our high net worth programme is strong. There is a high demand and a high level of interest for the high net worth, from the high net worth community who want to relocate to Jersey. But we are continuing to operate our policy of being very careful and very selective of who comes to live here. And we continue to follow that policy with high demand.
The Income Forecasting Group didn't seem to think there was high demand. They said that based on data from Locate Jersey, the high value residency scheme is actually looking for a downturn on its £1 million loss on the forecast in 2018. So do you have any plans with Locate Jersey to rejuvenate this scheme going forwards in the light of Guernsey's successes?
Well, this is a fast-moving situation wherein and views will change as we go from week to week. But I can reassure you that confidence is high in Locate Jersey and amongst the ministerial team that the demand will remain strong. We might see a dip in the short term, but we're going to still continue to promote and see significant returns from that sector of our economy. And I think it's also worth saying that right now, many of our high net worth individuals who have remained anonymous have contributed significant amount of money to the COVID-19, to various schemes and to the community.
Thank you, Martha. Now we move on to Alex from Channel 103.
Thank you both. At a previous press conference you were both present at, we heard the idea of an inter-island travel bubble being mooted between here and Guernsey. Obviously, there are now testing at the ports, and we're only down to 2 active cases that we know about. What progress has been made since then, and when do you think the islanders could see some developments in this area?
Well, it's hard to say. I'll hand over to Senator Gorst in a minute. It's hard to say. Today, we reported only 2 registered cases in Jersey and 0 patients in hospital. Guernsey have 0 cases. We are very close. We have been, both islands, all the Channel Islands have been extremely successful in medically eradicating the spread of the virus. I've also announced today that the accommodation sector will be able to open from the 12th of June with the appropriate guidelines for local stays. And I hope many islanders will have their summer holiday in Jersey and use some of our wonderful hotels during the summer. Of course, that won't go any way to compensating for the full loss of the tourism market. I think if the other Channel Islands are minded to do so at the right time in the near future, there is an opportunity for islanders to travel between the Channel Islanders. And I know Senator Gore's officials have been having talks along those lines. Ian, did you want to add anything?
Thank you. Yes, as we said the last time we were standing here, my officials has had provisional talks. It's been reported by other media outlets that Guernsey weren't quite ready for a bubble across the Channel Islands. They've just reopened their borders between islands within their own bailiwick. And I think it's quite clear that they are probably waiting for us to see if we can get to no active cases, which, as Deputy Chief Minister has said, today we stand here with only 2 active cases, and we congratulate all of those people involved in caring and getting us to this point in time. So I think that those talks could be restarted, as it were, when we get to that point of no active cases, and Guernsey themselves will have more confidence then in creating a Channel Island bubble. But also, as the Deputy Chief Minister says, we should not pretend that our economy, the domestic economy, even if we all staycate during the course of the summer, would be at any level of volume which would sustain those businesses in the way that they were prior to the virus. So we need to be realistic about that. It would be a very, very welcome first step.
Brilliant, thank you. And when it comes to trying to rebuild the economy for Jersey, do we want to just be aiming to get back to where we were before, or do you maybe see this as an opportunity to try and build back better and bring in some new measures?
Ian.
Okay, I'll start. So we are currently in the support phase, and the measures that Senator Farnham has announced are very much in the support phase. I've said before, and I've been criticised for it, I believe, and I know that the Treasury Minister with her colleagues is working on a very bold, big package to stimulate the economy around tax reductions, looking at contributions, perhaps money for lower paid individuals. We know we've already got the CREST scheme up and running. A variation of that might be possible, together with a huge pot of money running into many tens of millions of pounds to stimulate the economy, using a method similar to that we used coming out of the financial crisis. So the most important thing as we come through the health element is getting the current economy that we've got up and running and continuing to safeguard jobs. The co-fund scheme was all about safeguarding islanders' jobs. Fiscal stimulus will be all about safeguarding islanders' jobs. But with that pot of money, we can do some creative, we can do some entrepreneurial, we can do some environmental projects which will affect and drive our economy into the future in perhaps a new way. Certain sectors can be transformed with the use of digital. Many sectors actually can be. We can think much more about green energy. And that's a slightly longer, medium-term piece of work which Senator Farnham is absolutely in control of. He's announced today his Economic Council, and they will be collating all of those entrepreneurial ideas and driving the economy forward. Some have said building back better into the future. Yeah. But today's priority has got to be stimulating the economy that we had before we closed it down.
Can I also remind people of the challenges we faced coming into this? We had shortage of skills. challenges with low productivity. And I see this as an opportunity to rectify some of those problems of the past. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we have seen the value of technology, and we must embrace that. We must also embrace the opportunity to become more environmentally minded with our economic infrastructure. And I want to sort of stress again the importance of general commerce and our traditional industries of agriculture and tourism. So it's important as we develop a new deal, a new world economy, we create a well-balanced, a productive economic ecosystem.
Thank you, Alex. Now we move on to the BBC and Charlotte.
Hi, Charlotte Davis from the BBC here. I wanted to talk about how businesses have some extra costs associated with social distancing. I spoke to a hairdresser's earlier today, and they said they've spent £2,000 on extra PPE just for 1 month alone for when they first open. Will there be any extra help for businesses that do have to pay extra costs to abide by the social distancing guidelines?
So, as Senator Gorse referred to earlier, as we move into the economic recovery process and the way we're looking at the way we support financially, give direct financial support to business and other fiscal measures, and of course, the costs to running businesses during this challenging period will be taken into account. Ian, did you want to add anything? And it's not. I mean, it's across the sector. Businesses. All businesses, I think, have faced significant extra expense with the guidelines put in place. But equally, when we said we see opportunity, sometimes we see light from the dark. Some businesses actually said being forced to study the logistics of running our businesses, they think will lead them to become more productive and perhaps save money as they introduce new technology and new systems.
Senator Farnham has very clearly made a commitment, and he has my 100% support, that there will be no cliff edge to support to businesses. We have to think carefully about how we use our money, how we move between support and stimulus and the releasing of the lockdown measures. And the political and governmental aim is that there is no gap between, so that we're moving from support to stimulus, and businesses can feel the benefit of that, and at the same time moving through lockdown. So we're not going to say, just because we're announcing moving to level 2 today, that the co-payroll scheme is finishing. It is continuing at the same time that we're moving out of lockdown. We think that's a really important policy principle as we continue throughout the rest of this year. But it's not going to be straightforward or easy for businesses, as we've seen with those who were able to open, perhaps in the alfresco arena, when we move to level 3. The measures that we have in place will continue to impose costs on businesses, and we understand that, and we will continue to support where we can. We don't have any scheme in place to, at this point in time, help with the costs of PPE, but we will be continuing the co-payroll scheme.
Okay, thank you. And how long are you forecasting the loss to Jersey's foundation sector, so like agriculture, retail? And do you have enough money to fund it, or are we looking at, tax increases?
I'll start in, if I may. Realistically, the agricultural sector is still performing relatively well, not without challenge, of course. I've recently approved an additional £300,000 for the Rural Initiative Scheme. That's a scheme to help farmers invest in technology and equipment that would help them improve productivity, i.e. produce more goods for less resource. And also the rural economy strategy is looking at ways it can expand. We've seen other products such as the tea crop, and we're quite advanced in the development of the medicinal and pharmaceutical cannabis sector. And investment has continued to go into that sector during the pandemic period. Tourism has been particularly hard hit, the hardest hit of all sectors, especially the accommodation sector, which is why I welcome the hotels and self-catering units being able to open, albeit for local use initially, very soon. And again, being realistic, that sector is going to need support well into next year and possibly longer if we are to retain the level of air and sea links that we enjoy and retain the valuable tourism assets that if we don't support, we could lose them. And once they're gone, they're possibly gone forever.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. Now we move on to the...
Shall I just answer that perhaps a bit more directly? So we're going to, as we go through this crisis, we are going to start seeing some saying that how we've done things in the past wasn't very good and we've got nothing to learn from it. But we come into this crisis in a very strong financial position. There are not many places around the world that have got a strategic reserve to the level of GVA that we have in Jersey. There are certainly far fewer that have got a level of social security reserve that we have here. There are certainly far fewer that have got a strong, pretty powerful balance sheet that they can use as well, nor have the strength of the ability to borrow with the credit rating that we've got. So let's not look back and pretend it was all terrible in the past. It was those brave decisions from decade after decade that has created the strong position that we find ourselves in today. And that means, albeit I've been criticised for saying that in due course we're going to have to think about how we replenish the strategic reserve, and I stand by those statements, now we are rightly focusing on stimulating the economy and getting islanders back into the jobs that they had before the economy was locked down. And in order to do that, we've got a revolving credit facility of £500 million. We've got several £100 million in the strategic reserve. We've got assets that we can use more strategically. So we're not going to be asking for tax rises in this phase. That would be wrong. The most important thing is continuing with what we've been trying to deliver throughout this crisis, and that is the maintenance of islanders' jobs and livelihoods, and that's where we're focusing.
Okay, thank you. Now, the JP and Ian Heath.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Ian. Yeah.
Okay, good. I wanted to talk to you perhaps a little bit about the Economic Recovery Political Oversight Group and the Economic Council. There's been some talk about, diversifying the economy, so to speak, more technology. But I had a look at the makeup of the Political Oversight Group. There's kind of nobody really who's an expert in that field on there. I didn't see anybody from agriculture, wasn't really a tech guy or tourism guy. I just wanted to ask you, if you're going to, one of your stated goals is for an inclusive recovery. Do you think that needs to be addressed? We need to expand who's participating in these groups and who will participate in the Economic Council to ensure that we have an inclusive recovery.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Let me reassure you, the Economic Council is going to be where the action is at, and we're putting that together now. We're having up to I would think 15 members, 15 business experts from all walks of business life and experts sitting beneath that council. We will have, I think, 6 thematic or industry sector groups put together to look at various aspects, thematic aspects such as productivity or industry sector specific groups. There are a number of think tanks, very, very good think tanks that have emerged around the island who we're going to ask to feed directly into the Economic Council. So the Economic Council will be the first port of call, hopefully, for all the new blue sky thinking, all of the ideas, all of the innovation and the expertise around that council, supported by a high-level officer group, will report directly into the Political Oversight Group and or the Council of Ministers. But we're putting that together. I hope to announce the final names and lineup of the Economic Council by the end of the week. And then we are going to get going. But I don't want to actually start fixing on the direction of travel right now until we have had our states in committee debate tomorrow. It is absolutely right. In fact, it's essential that the states members, who are the representatives of all islands, get the opportunity to contribute to the direction of travel at this early stage. And I hope some states members will be involved in some of the subsector groups moving forward.
Okay, sure. Would Senator Gorse like to comment on that also?
No.
No,
No, he
Senator
doesn't.
Farnham is chairing the Economic Council. You've heard his commitment today, and he's said it in private meetings as well, that he wants this to be a very broad church, certainly touching on the areas that you've just mentioned, Ian. But if you go back to the government's what do we call it now, the government plan, and you look at the priorities in that government plan, it gives you a really good indication of the direction that that Economic Council will be rightly thinking about. The use of technology right across our island. This morning I was in a meeting talking to financial services people about how we can use technology in a smarter way there. The environmental challenges that the entire world faces and that we want to be right at the forefront of, so new environmental policies, how can we spend our money differently and smarter, and there are many other areas we can do the same, and I've got every confidence that Senator Farnham will ensure that those proposals brought forward up to the political oversight group onto the States Assembly will be a very broad church, and there is nothing that should be off the table. We should look at entrepreneurialism and creative ideas in a way that perhaps the dead arm of government has not been able to look at in the past. And I've got every confidence that he will do that.
Okay, sure. Next question. I understand the announcement's going to be made on stimulus this week, and we're probably going to have to wait till then to get more detail. What I might ask, though, is what can we expect in terms of long-term strategy of stimulus? There's going to be probably quite a lot of shift in the economy over a couple of years. Some firms are going to really need help now. Some might need it in a couple of years' time. Are we going to see a lot of stimulus very suddenly to get things going, or is it going to be quite measured over a long period of time?
Ian, you take that.
Well, Ian, these things are never that straightforward. First of all, our top priority is to, as we say, I've got to be careful using that phrase, but the top priority is to continue to follow the strategy to keep the virus suppressed. So that's the strategy that we've been following, and we're seeing the virus now down with 2 active cases in our community. And so we're then following the safe exit framework to safely get people back to work. But we need to put money into the economy now in the very short term, so that those jobs continue to be safeguarded, those businesses can start to open and they can start to trade. But at the same time, we have to put money aside for, we know that capital projects, if we're going to enhance the cycle routes, or we're going to green St Helier with more green spaces in St Helier, all things that align with the government plan and are really important, and things that we've learnt that we need to do through this crisis, they will take longer. They'll have to go through a planning process. They'll have to become, in the technical jargon, shovel ready. But we have to put the money aside to be able to do that all the time. Of course, we're going to need to continue to balance states' budgets. So it'll be an immediate. I say immediate in the next number of weeks, and then a medium and longer term. Some of the measures will be pretty quickly introduced as they are announced in the coming days. Some will take a lot longer.
Okay, sure, thank you.
Thank you, Ian. And now we move on to ITV Channel and Gary Burgess.
Afternoon, everybody. When do the pubs open?
You can, if you're that desperate for a drink, Gary, you can go to an al fresco area and order some with food. But actually, we can't really open the pubs under the 2 metre guideline. So realistically, that's going to come as we move towards level 1. That would require the move to 1 metre physical distancing. We were discussing that this morning. I know our STAC committee are examining all those possibilities now. We're also, given our situation where we have very, very low cases of COVID-19 here, we could move to that towards the end of the month, beginning of July, maybe a little bit sooner. We're going to be watching what other jurisdictions do as well. But I want to be absolutely clear. We're moving forward in small steps. And as long as we continue to be successful, I anticipate by the end of the month, we should be approaching aspects of level 1.
Great, thank you very much. Senator Gorst, a few weeks ago, you sort of put the willies up all of us by saying it would be a betrayal of future generations if we now all didn't pay more to fill the black hole. And today you're saying, oh, no, tax cuts because we're all struggling. Which is the real Senator Gorst?
They're both the real Senator Gorst. Stimulating the economy now, Gary, and let's be clear, I never use that phrase that you just used because I never use it, because ministers rightly take long-term decisions to ensure that we have balanced budgets over the economic cycle. And it is quite simply true that we must continue to make difficult decisions so that islanders continue to have a balanced budget over the economic cycle. But at the point where we are now in the economic cycle, with businesses closed because government has said in order to control and suppress the virus, businesses must be closed, now is the time for tax reductions and pumping money into the economy in a way like we have never seen before. And I don't apologise for that. It's absolutely the right thing to do, because we are keeping islanders in work and making sure they've got jobs to go back to as we move safely through the safe exit strategy. We'll come in due course to talk about those replenishments, but it's right that we can do both. That's what islanders and future generations expect.
So I was going to say, just to put it in layman's terms for people who don't understand what an economic cycle is, including people like me, you're saying tax cuts in the short term, and then when we're not all struggling and back on our feet, tax rises there.
No, we're not. We're not saying that right now, and so no, that's not what we're saying. Next question.
Well,
Okay, my question is, what are you saying?
What we've been explaining throughout the media conference this morning. There is no immediate plans or policy to put taxes up right now. Okay, we're looking carefully at the future, and the general views around the Council of Ministers table, and talking to other states members, is we must continue to be prudent with our finances. It will take 2 to 3, possibly 4 years to get the economy back to where it was, and perhaps a decade or 2 to get the strategic reserve back to the desired levels.
Great, thank you both.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got time to go around everybody again. So first of all, back to Martha from Bailiwick Express.
Thank you. Can I ask how the members of the political oversight group were appointed, and could you please detail the recruitment process for the Economic Council that you're going through currently as well?
So the political oversight group consists of 5 ministers. Chief Minister is the chair of the group, Senator Gorst, Senator Valois, the Treasury Minister, Deputy Pinnell, and myself. At the moment, the Economic Council will be chaired by myself, assisted by the Deputy of Grouville, Deputy Labby, the Minister for International Development. And we're currently working with officers who have gone out to a number of organisations and interested parties in as many sectors of the economy as possible, and we're compiling the Economic Council initially in that way. There's simply not time to go to a full-blown recruitment process at this stage, but bearing in mind the Economic Council will be an advisory group. So I'm undertaking to make it as broad and as wide-ranging as possible to make sure we represent as wide a spectrum of islanders' views as we possibly can.
Just to clarify, the question was about how the business members of the political oversight group were appointed.
Well, we haven't appointed them as yet. We're in the process of doing that this week. So just to be a little bit clearer, officers have contacted on behalf of the Chief Minister and myself a number of members of the community largely upon recommendations from industry sectors and invited them to join, and that's the process we're going through. So it's by invitation at this stage.
So the representatives from the business community, Wendy Martin, Andrew McLaughlin, John Reaver and Gerald Voisin, they're not officially members.
Oh, sorry, they're advising the political oversight group. Okay, so the political oversight group has got four advisors that have been appointed by the Chief Minister. The Economic Council is running through the process I just explained, and the advisors were appointed by the Chief Minister. They were invited by the Chief Minister.
Okay, so not to labour the point, but how did the Chief Minister decide on those four advisors?
Well, that's a question for the Chief Minister to answer. But in the same way as myself and members of the Political Oversight Group will have to sign off members of the Economic Council, the Chief Minister will have based his choice upon recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Martha. Now, Alex from 103.
Thank you. We heard a bit last week with the news that dentists are able to reopen from today, and some of the measures that they're able to put in place to operate safely despite not being able to maintain physical distancing. For other businesses that will be able to reopen from the 12th of June, so say hairdressers and things like that, what sort of measures is the government expecting in order for them to be able to operate safely?
Well, there will be industry sector-specific guidelines. Many industry sectors over here are affiliated to a UK representative body. Many of those bodies have guidelines which they're sharing with the Jersey their Jersey members. So it will all be based around safe distancing and best hygiene practices. And officers have been working over the previous days and the last week with these sectors and are making good headway in producing the guidelines. And I would want to thank those sectors for the professionalism and the helpful way they've worked with government. It's going to be the principle's the same throughout all industry sectors about protecting people from the spread of the virus, but the guidelines will be quite specific and will be available prior to opening on the 12th.
Thank you. And just for perhaps small businesses who won't be affiliated with a larger organisation, will they just have to sort of use their best judgment as to how the safest way is to operate, or will they have to stay closed?
No. They're all have access to the States of Jersey guidelines. Just for example, opticians, for example, have the College of Opticians, which will provide guidelines, which is helpful. We don't need to reinvent the wheel over here when we can call on guidelines that have been drawn up in the UK as an example. But many smaller business in different sectors across the economy will, of course, have access to the state's guidelines.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we move on to the BBC and Charlotte Davis.
Sam Mesick and Reform Jersey are calling for a new deal for Jersey. That means no austerity measures, review of all capital expenditure projects, and a radical approach to recovery. I'd like to know how the government responds to that.
Well, I don't think any of us have seen it yet. I understand that Reform Jersey are making these proposals, and the government will welcome them, just as we welcome proposals and ideas from any states member or any organisational group around the island. So we're very much looking forward to seeing them. As I said in my opening remarks, it's really important that the states come together, especially at this stage, while still challenging each other democratically, to consider all sorts of ideas. And I very much think and hope that the pathway to future economic recovery will be the very best blend of ideas brought about by the people's representatives in the Assembly.
Senator Gorse, did you want to add anything to that at all?
No, thank you.
Okay, I just want to quickly go on from Alex on that. Do you not think it would be really important to have sector-specific guidelines out from the government? Because, say, I was speaking to a hairdresser, they said they don't have any guidelines. They're going on what they think is best, but they're spending thousands of pounds. If there was some sort of guidelines, do you not think that would be beneficial to sectors across the island, especially what you're calling the so-called foundation sector of Jersey?
The hair and beauty sector is a good example, and I know a group from that industry met with officers last week, and I understand it was a very productive meeting, and they are working up guidelines together. The states want to make sure the guidelines they produce are safe, they don't compromise people's safety, and they utilise the best hygiene practices, but also want to make them realistic and viable for the businesses as well. Every industry sector will have guidelines. The states are working that up now. So my advice to businesses in any sector that are perhaps not part of an industry sector, a group or organisation, is just to sit tight for a few more days and wait until the guidelines are published. And then they'll be able to follow the best advice rather than spending perhaps money unnecessarily, or contact most industries have a committee or a body that represent them. For businesses that aren't involved, contact their industry body and find out where they are with the work they're doing with the government.
Can I just add to that as well? The other port of call could be either the Jersey Chamber of Commerce, if they're a member there. If they're not, then Jersey Business, because they also are helping officials with the flow across the business sectors of the guidelines.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, the JP and Ian Heath.
Okay, I just want to go back to a question on the strategic reserve. You kindly gave some indication of what time frame you think it might take to replenish the strategic reserve. What I'd like to know is, to what level do you think it should be replenished? Do you think it should be targeted? Because before this crisis, the FPP indicated they think it actually needed to be large. I think 30% of GVA is an extra 600 million. So where do we need to go back to? Back to where it was, or back to that level that was?
I think it's impossible to say at this stage, but I very much anticipate that the government and the States Assembly and future States Assemblies will want to see a strategic reserve that is somewhat larger than the level that we currently went in with. So I think in the fullness of time, we should expect to see a larger strategic reserve. Given the sudden and unexpected nature of the pandemic that we're facing now, I think it has been a bit of a wake-up call for islanders, and to that extent we want to ensure that future generations will be protected from such eventualities. It's impossible to give a figure now, but I think Ian agrees we're probably looking at a larger fund in the fullness of time.
Okay.
I think the other thing that we're learning through this crisis is not just to fixate on the strategic reserve, because the state's balance sheet has got billions of pounds in it. Some of that is sitting doing nothing. And what this crisis is doing is challenging us, as we've been saying throughout this press conference, to think differently. We know that equities and everything in the strategic reserve have recently done very, very well. We can use the credit facility to draw down on that first, whilst the current strategic reserve continues to grow in the economic global bounce back, and therefore that will cushion what we're doing as well. But the secret's going to be using the balance sheet and thinking about it in a different way, not just fixating on the cash in the bank.
Okay, interesting. And just another quick fire one. We mentioned stimulus, tax cuts, potential tax cuts being part of the overall package. The industry which has been hit hardest is hospitality. I think everyone agrees on that. And the tax which impacts on them perhaps disproportionately compared to everyone else is AMPO duties. Is that on table, an AMPO duty cut?
We haven't discussed anything specifically or in detail. That's work to be done in the weeks ahead. So it's impossible to comment there. But as Ian said before, it's going to be necessary to provide support to business to protect jobs and ensure we keep really important parts of our industry sectors, especially tourism, because of the impact on the broader economy and the transport links viable and in place. So those are discussions to be had.
Okay, great, thank you.
And finally now, ITV Channel and Gary.
Senator Gorst, with both the hats on that you're wearing today, really. I know we spoke earlier about a Channel Islands bubble, but actually in the grand scheme of things, the game is getting connected with the UK. How important in your mind is it that this airport trial is successful so we have an option in lieu of quarantine, with a view, as I've heard the ambition is, to get some air routes reopened before the end of this month?
We are going through the safe exit strategy carefully, following the best medical advice coming from STAC and then into government through Medical Officer for Health. And the work that officials are doing, and it's being coordinated by my officials, is very much in conjunction with STAC. We are extremely fortunate that we went into, I know we like to complain about waiting at the airport and our ferry links, but we went into this crisis for the size of population being incredibly well connected. And we need to be careful with the measures that we take so that that connectivity returns as we come out of the health crisis, which is why the pilot is very, very important, because it will give the data, which will give the confidence to allow the clinicians, Medical Officer for Health, to advise ministers on whether there is a sufficiently robust testing regime and tracing regime to mean that the 14-day quarantine doesn't need to be universal. And it is really important that we can manage that process and that pilot so that there's, where possible, a rough alignment between when carriers want to start flying around the UK with when we have confidence in our data. But let's be clear, it's one of our biggest challenges as we see the virus suppressed, virtually eliminated with only 2 active cases, that we get that right and we do it carefully and we do it safely. But equally, we can't bury our head in the sands and not do it at all. We've got to do it on a timely basis. And that's why there's a lot of effort going into trying to get that pilot right, to provide the data to allow us to move safely and carefully to that point. Because if we lose that connectivity as we come out of this health element, it will be really quite difficult for us to get it back as some of those operators move assets elsewhere around the United Kingdom or elsewhere around the globe. But we can only do it safely, and we can only do it when health officials have got confidence in the data that comes out of that pilot. And of course, even once we've got that data, we have to be confident that a scaling up of a pilot regime provides the same safety and security. So we're going to be talking more about it. We're going to be seeing the results of the pilot, because it's not just confidence for health officials. It's actually really important for confidence across our community, because I know that islanders have been contacting me about wondering about whether now is the right time to open the borders and remove the quarantine. And we can only give confidence across the island when we get that right.
Very handily, it's 3 o'clock, so there's no longer an embargo on the reformed Jersey New Deal. They'd like to remove the cap on social security contributions for rich people, for rich residents to pay an equal share of income tax, for private utilities to be nationalised, for struggling sectors to be subsidised, and for the government potentially to take stakes in individual businesses that are struggling. I just wondered your initial reaction.
I think we'd probably both like time to study their proposals, and then we can give a more meaningful response, Gary. But let's have a look at it first.
I mean, Senator Farnham is absolutely right, but you wouldn't expect me to say nothing because it's not in my nature. Let's look at their proposals. Let's remind ourselves that this current government is actually in coalition with Reform Jersey. So like every minister brings their proposals to the Council of Ministers tables and argues them on their economic merit and the value to all islanders, then I ask them to do the same. And I'm sure that Senator Mezek and Deputy Tadia will do just that, and we'll have a really good argument and conversation, and Senator Farnham's Economic Council will try to make sense of them, and will come forward with exciting ideas to get the economy back up and running, to support islanders' jobs, and to have a positive future.
Thank you. I think that's a really strong note to end on. Thank you, Ian. Can I, as always, thank the media for being here and the excellent work the media are doing in presenting and the news to islanders at this difficult time. We have made progress. We've made safe progress. The policy we've adopted has worked, and we have moved to almost eradicate the disease from Jersey. And that has all been made possible by the people of Jersey and the ongoing support and the actions and sacrifices that islanders have made. So thank you to you all. Can I just appeal that we want you to continue to follow the guidelines, because we want to keep moving safely forward. So please continue to follow the guidelines and stay safe. Thank you.